It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Today I want to talk about the Document Imaging Channel's Evolutionary event. Folks, you know Friday I did that parody on the generations within the Document Imaging Channel. Those friends of mine that self-supply and service print equipment, kind of making fun of the generations. There's a lot of fun we can have with that. But there's a real serious side to this. And the serious side of this is our industry is going through an evolutionary event. It's no longer about passing the baton from one generation to the other because the baton burned up in the volcano. When the volcano goes off, it changes the landscape. It's an evolutionary event. And when the landscape changes, well, guess what? All around it changes too. And the Document Imaging Channel, you'd have to admit, the landscape's changed. We're going through an evolutionary event. And we can't just take for granted that we're able to pass the baton from one generation to the other. And when you think about the generation of our industry, folks, the BTA is getting ready to sell its 100th birthday. Been around a long time. Think about it. Just think about the last 70 years, the typewriter. Think about back in the 70s. What did we come out with? The copy machine that had the thermal paper. Boy, that was exciting. MFPs, printers and copiers, managed print services, production print, document management. What do all these things have in common? Well, the commonality is a simple one. We provided a product to the marketplace that we rented or leased, that we would then go prematurely upgrade so we get new products into the account. And while those products were in the account, we supplied them and we serviced them with humans and parts. That's the industry. I mean, no matter what we sold, it was all about a supply and a part, and a rental or a lease. That was our industry. And ladies and gentlemen, where are we at now with this evolutionary event? We're moving into a managed services world. It's a whole new world. All the intellect, all the knowledge from the previous generations, well, a lot of that knowledge, a lot of that intellect is going to be irrelevant on the other side of that red line in the evolutionary event. Again, it's no longer about just passing the baton from one generation to the next. It's about building a whole new baton. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I put together some slides here, and I just want to go through this with you. But, you know, we need to get the bulldozer out to the building out in front, and we need to tear it down, and we need to thank those who came before us. But now it's time to bulldoze the past. In order for us to deliver the future to the present, and the future is here today, we need to make some serious adjustments. We're going to have to face the challenges that are in front of us and defeat those challenges. But I want us to think about this, and I put together this slide here. There's a lot on here. I just kind of want to walk you through this a little bit, but think about the generational changes. You know, over this last 70, 100 years, the different generations that we had in the industries as it was changing. And folks, it was an entrepreneurial leadership that built our industry, right? And then as time went on, those entrepreneurs were able to pass the baton to the management teams. And that's really kind of where we're at for a lot of our industry. We're in the management phase. I realize that there's still some entrepreneurs out there, but for the most part, a lot of our industry is just being managed. When you look inside some of these OEMs, and we've all had these conversations, how the OEM leaders aren't really entrepreneurs, they're just managers, they're hanging around till they retire. The age, you know, look at some of the age of the people on the boards of some of the OEMs and things like that, and you start realizing, what's the industry really doing? Has the baton been passed to the last person? Sometimes I really believe that, and I know a lot of my followers believe the same thing. But folks, when you think about the generational changes that our industry went through, they were pretty simplistic because the industry really didn't change. Oh yeah, the products changed and maybe the way we serviced them changed a little bit, but the core business model was really relatively the same. Whether it was a typewriter, a copy machine, an MFP, it all needed what? It was a product that needed a supply and a service that we rented or we leased, that we prematurely upgraded. I think about the generational changes of our industry. It was really a lawyer who settled a case. So think about the law firm where the lawyer just settles a case. When we go into this evolutionary event, I want you to think about the law firm on permanent retainer. In other words, the old way of doing business was the lawyer who just settled the case. The new way of business, where we're going into the services and managing infrastructure for clients and all this stuff, it's really a law firm on permanent retainer. Those are two different law firms. Those are two different skill sets. And we need to start thinking about this as we bring in human capital for our industry's evolutionary event. Because, folks, we still got people bringing in the same people they've always brought in. We still have people looking in the same places they've always looked, and they're missing the same thing everybody else is missing. But we're moving into this services world. It's not about passing the baton. It's about building a whole new baton to pass on to the next generation, because we're in an evolutionary event. And folks, transformation is not going to be a byproduct of a fantasy-based software or fantasy-based streams. And I'm going to tell all my friends this. I believe the dealers have to start their own initiatives. You're not going to get this from the OEMs. Okay? We can witness the OEMs, what they're doing. We can pay attention to the OEMs, what they're doing through their transformations. But at the end of the day, we see some of these OEMs have been talking about this for a long, long time and accomplishing nothing as far as that they're willing to share. And we don't know what the revenue is. We don't know what the profit is of some of these transformations. We think everything's just going to be fine if we just wait another 10 years to do it. But at the end of the day, the buzzwords, the DX strategies, and all this nonsense that we hear in the marketplace, the dealers themselves have to define what that means to them and their business, and how are they going to get through the evolutionary event on their own. Okay? How are they going to get through the evolutionary event on their own? Because here's the reality. Our industry is at a point, because it is in an evolutionary event, it needs entrepreneurs. You can't manage your way through an evolutionary event. It's impossible. It takes entrepreneurial leadership to accomplish that. Please soul search and think about this. And if you need to bring in those entrepreneurs, bring them in. If you need to appoint a new president or a new CEO to your company that has skill sets beyond you, bring them in. Because you're never going to get through this evolutionary shift. Transformation, I want everybody to think about this. Do we really know the why? Because there's a lot of folks out there talking about the how of the DX strategy. And sometimes we don't even know how they're doing these things when they throw out all the buzzwords and when they describe their DX strategy. But why are we doing it? Our industry has to really start paying attention to the why of its end users. And when we understand the why of its end users, we'll be able to understand how we're going to come into the marketplace and help those end users with their why. We got too many folks trying to figure out how to do something or how to reinvent something that doesn't need to be reinvented. You know, just because our industry is going through this evolutionary event doesn't mean that evolutionary event already happened in other industries. Let me explain that. In other words, some of the stuff we're looking for is already existing because those industries already went through an evolutionary event. People, entrepreneurs, invented stuff that's working that we could adapt as we go through our evolutionary event. Doesn't mean we got to reinvent stuff that's already existing. And folks, there's a lot of folks out there. I hear these fantasies around software and bringing in new ERPs and all this nonsense. We're trying to, build things that already exist. What we really need to do is start selling stuff to end users based on their why. Why do they need these things? Find out what they need. Go sell those to them. And as we start selling more and more stuff to the end users, guess what? We'll figure out how to manage it. We don't need to build some fictitious platforms to do something we think we're going to do. We need to, in fact, go do it. And this transformation has to transfer to the bottom line. It can't be just a bunch of talk forever. I'm going to show you something here, folks. And I know some people are automatically going to say, Ray, you're picking on Konica Minolta again, but I'm not picking on Konica Minolta. Konica Minolta has a great story to share. And it has a great lesson to share, if you will, as well. So a couple of weeks ago, I did a video on an article that was published in the Canada Report where Konica's talking about it's coming back. We know that Konica's had a couple of tough years. And when I read the article, and part 2, by the way, was published, and y'all need to read this stuff. And I can't be the only ones that would be asking questions when you read this stuff. But I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to share some insights on what this article says, because at the end of the day, This article kind of proves my point, I believe, about how we're not understanding the generational versus the evolutionary impact of our industry. Because when I read this, and Konica has been big about talking about the DX strategy, and they're all covered, IT services aspirations. But they publish an article titled "We're Back." And you know what they're talking about through the whole article, for both articles? For the most part, they're talking about all their print products. They're talking about all their print products. There's nothing in here about we're back with digital strategies, and here's the strategy, and here's how we're monetizing it, and here's how this is going to look on our P&L. We're so grateful we're replacing this declining print revenue with additional revenues. None of that. It's about what everybody's comfortable with. It's about what the generations of the past are comfortable with. We could talk about the future, right? But we sure don't want to prove that we're actually accomplishing anything in what we're talking about, because none of the folks are doing this. It's not just Konica. Rico's in the same boat as far as I'm concerned. They talk about e-commerce, and I could do a whole episode on that. I probably will. But at the end of the day, I believe we're trying to take practices and ideas from the industry's past generations and implement those in the industry's evolutionary event. And if we continue to do this, we are going to fail, whether we're an OEM or whether we're a dealer. It's not about the industry's past generations and how we're going to continue to try to save that and push that into this evolutionary event. It's a whole new world. It's a whole new landscape. I would have got so excited if I could have read an article. Konica Minolta is back on track, part 2. And they share the details of why they're back on track outside of print. Because here's the reality, folks. What this tells me is without print, Konica Minolta was a mess. And thankfully, they can get toner to customers. Thankfully, they got product they could get to dealers. Guess what? That's not the future. That's a temporary fix to an ever-changing circumstance. And it's a little bit scary when you see this stuff coming from the OEMs. And I think we need to think about this and think about it hard. Because if the industry is going to transform and we're waiting for the OEMs to show us the way, whether it's Konica Minolta, whether you read stuff that Rico puts out there, folks, they're all these folks. They don't have the answers. It's up to the dealers, the entrepreneurs within those dealerships, to figure out how to take your business out of the generational shifts, cross the line of the evolutionary event, and succeed. It's up to you, folks. No one's going to do this for you. There's no baton to pass. The baton got burned up in the volcano. And it's time for all of my friends to dig deep down in their souls and decide, what do we need to get through this evolutionary event? Because everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see you all tomorrow.